I never thought a simple family dinner could destroy me, but it did. We were halfway through dinner, lasagna still steaming on our plates, when Jason leaned back in his chair and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "You know, Mom, you don't work, you don't contribute, and all you do is criticize. You're nothing but a burden." I froze. I opened my mouth, maybe to defend myself, maybe to cry. But before I could say a word, David stood up. My husband, who usually stays silent during Jason's little jabs, pushed back his chair so hard it scraped the hardwood. He placed both hands on the table and said, with that quiet steel I hadn't heard in years, "She sacrificed her life for you. Without her, you'd be nothing." Jason blinked like he'd been slapped. Then he laughed, a nervous, defensive laugh. Megan finally looked up from her plate, but only for a second. And the children, one of them dropped their fork. The youngest, Ava, looked at me like she was about to cry. That broke me more than Jason's words ever could. I didn't yell. I didn't storm out. I gathered the plates like the good little housewife they still seemed to think I was. I loaded the dishwasher in silence, hands shaking. When I turned around, the table was quiet. David had sat back down. No one said a word. Jason was staring at his phone like none of it had happened. But it had. Something shifted in me that night. Not rage, not yet, but something colder. A stillness, like a hand turning a lock deep inside. Later, upstairs in our bedroom, David poured me a cup of chamomile tea and sat beside me on the edge of the bed. "We're not victims," he said. "We're their parents, and we've got the receipts." I didn't sleep that night. I lay there staring at the ceiling, my tea cold in my hands. And for the first time since our son moved in, I realized something. We were going to take our lives back. And this time, we weren't asking permission. It didn't start at that dinner table. That was just where it exploded. The rot had been spreading for months. Maybe longer, if I'm honest with myself. Jason lost his job last spring. Corporate downsizing, he said, like it wasn't his third firing in 4 years. Megan called 2 days later, crying. Rent was due, their credit cards were maxed, and their boys needed school supplies. So of course, we said yes. They moved in, just for a few months. Her exact words. We offered them the upstairs, told them to treat it like home. David and I started paying for more groceries, covered their cell phone bill without a word, even paid off their electric so they wouldn't fall behind. But the big ask came 6 weeks later. Jason sat us down at the kitchen table, the same one where he'd call me a burden months later, and asked for a loan. Just enough to get us through until things stabilize. Maybe $20,000. Actually, could you make it $30,000 just to be safe? David and I looked at each other. We'd been saving that money for a new roof. Maybe a vacation we'd been putting off for 12 years. But our son needed help. So we wired him the money that same day. And just like that, our house became their headquarters. It started small. Jason taking the good coffee and not replacing it. Megan moving our coats out of the hallway closet because her boys needed space. I came home one day to find our guest towels in their laundry bin. They weren't guests anymore. They were squatters with our last name. Megan started correcting how I cooked in my own kitchen. Actually, avocado oil is better for cholesterol, Dot. And Jason stopped asking before using our car. Twice I came downstairs to find them watching TV with the thermostat cranked to 75, while David and I wore sweaters upstairs to save on heating. They never said thank you, not once. And still, I told myself, they're stressed, they're young, things will get better. But things didn't get better. They got louder, ruder, more entitled. Megan told Ava, my granddaughter, that I meant well, but didn't understand modern parenting. Jason borrowed my laptop without asking and left it in the garage. He started ignoring us unless he needed something. And slowly, our home stopped feeling like ours. People think disrespect shows up as yelling. It doesn't. Sometimes it sounds like silence, or the way your son walks past you in the hallway like your furniture. Jason and Megan had been living upstairs for 6 months at that point. What started as support had turned into servitude. David and I paid the bills, bought the groceries, covered their phone plans, and still, Somehow, we were the inconvenience. I'd fold their laundry. Megan would refold it. You mix the kids, socks wrong. Jason would use my car without asking and bring it back with the gas light on. And more than once, I came home to find Megan reorganizing my pantry. My house. They didn't say thank you. They didn't ask, they just took. Then came the moment I stopped pretending. I overheard Megan on the phone with her sister, pacing the hallway upstairs, not realizing I was behind the laundry room door. She hovers, she said. Dot needs to retire from life, honestly. I stood there, holding a laundry basket full of her children's pajamas, and felt a silence grow inside me so sharp it could cut steel. Retire? From life? That night, I didn't say anything to David. I didn't need to. He could feel something had shifted. We started pulling back, just to see. When we didn't buy the groceries, Jason left a sticky note on the fridge. Out of milk. Like I was the maid. When the vacuum clogged, Megan left it in the hall. Not broken, just waiting for Mom to take care of it. But the breaking point came when Jason helped himself to our fireproof file box, the one with our retirement documents and savings ledgers. I walked in on him flipping through our tax returns. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying to stay calm. He didn't look up. "Seeing what you guys really have. Maybe then we won't have to keep begging for scraps." Begging? They were living here for free. We'd loaned them $30,000. And now he was treating our finances like they were his inheritance. That night, after Jason slammed his door and Megan retreated upstairs without so much as a glance, I stood at the sink washing dishes I hadn't eaten from. Steam rose around my hands. My back ached, but I scrubbed every plate like I was trying to erase something bigger than spaghetti sauce. Maybe shame. Maybe the years we'd spent trying to pretend everything was normal. David dried quietly beside me. We didn't speak, not until the last spoon hit the drying rack and we turned off the kitchen light. Upstairs, in our bedroom, he sat on the edge of the bed and unlaced his shoes like he had every night for 43 years. Only this time, he didn't go quiet afterward. He looked up at me and said, very simply, "We're not victims." Then he paused, like he needed to make sure I believed it too. "We're their parents, Ruth, not their punching bags. And we've got the receipts." I didn't respond right away. I just sat beside him, listening to the tick of the wall clock. Our room, the only space in the house that still felt like ours, was suddenly filled with a quiet kind of certainty. He pulled out the old file box from the closet, the fireproof one we kept locked, where every important document lived: tax returns, mortgage records, savings statements. At the bottom, in a sealed envelope, was the loan agreement Jason had signed in our kitchen, the day we handed him $30,000. I'd almost forgotten we had it. David flipped it open and laid it on the bed between us like it was a weapon. "They think we're soft," he said. "They think we're weak, but they've forgotten who we were before we were Mom and Dad." He wasn't wrong. Before the diapers and debt, I was a legal secretary for 15 years. David was a staff sergeant in the Army. We weren't fools. We weren't helpless. We just stopped defending ourselves somewhere along the way. The kindness had become habit, the silence too. But now, we started planning. We sat down together, just the two of us, and wrote it out. We wanted our home back, not just the walls and windows, the space, the feeling of safety, of ownership, of not walking on eggshells in our own kitchen. We wanted the $30,000 returned, not because we needed it to survive, but because we were done teaching our son that taking from us came with no consequences. We wanted peace. Not gossip, not shouting matches, no dramatic Facebook posts or neighborhood whispers, just peace, quiet mornings, uninterrupted dinners, a home where we weren't guests in our own lives. And we wanted to show our grandchildren something their parents had clearly forgotten: what real self-respect looks like. Because they were watching, always, little eyes catching every moment of disrespect, every shrug, every time Jason rolled his eyes or Megan dismissed me with that sugary tone that barely hid the contempt. I'd seen Ava glance at me when Megan snapped. I'd seen the confusion in Ethan's face when Jason barked at David. They were learning something, whether we liked it or not. So we made one final decision that night. We would not be teaching them that love means letting people use you. David stood and tore the list from the notebook, folded it once, slid it into the center drawer of his desk. "We start tomorrow," he said, and for the first time in a long, long time, I believed that we would. The next morning, David unlocked the old fireproof box again, not with anger, with purpose. Inside were the documents we'd both forgotten we still had. But now, looking at them, it was like they'd been waiting for this moment. First came the loan agreement, Jason's signature. My handwriting, witnessed, dated, notarized at the UPS store down on Main. He'd insisted we didn't need to make it so formal, but we had, and thank God we did. David laid it on the table without a word. Then came the next file, one I hadn't looked at in over a year. Jason had used our address to open a business credit line, something we'd agreed to briefly when he was starting a consulting company. Said it would just be to prove stability for the bank. We thought nothing of it at the time. He was our son. But when the first late notice arrived 6 months later, addressed to our home, David had shut it down. He'd contacted the bank, told them the address was not associated with any business activity. Apparently, Jason never closed that account. David pulled out the printed statements from his follow-up request. Charges for equipment we'd never seen. 2 cash advances. 1 payment to a marketing agency in Arizona. We don't know anyone in Arizona. All under our roof. Next came the recordings. I'd forgotten I'd even saved them. But there they were on my old phone. Voicemails, messages, and 1 bank call I'd recorded by accident. Jason had called to request a loan extension and used me as the excuse. My mother's unstable, early dementia. I've been covering her medications and home care. It's been hard, you know. I'd been baking a pie that day. He used me. My health, my name, my kindness. David didn't say a word. He just turned the screen toward me and pressed play. I listened to my son, my own flesh and blood, describe me like I was a burden, a liability, some problem he'd been forced to carry. It was like hearing someone else, a stranger with Jason's voice. By the end, I couldn't even cry. I just looked at David and said, "Well, I suppose we've got more than receipts now." We had evidence, not just of disrespect, of fraud, of lies, of a pattern, and we were ready to do something about it. We didn't want to involve a stranger. Not yet. So David made a call. His old Army buddy, Marcus Ellis, had become a family lawyer after they left the service. Retired now, mostly did estate planning and the occasional custody case, but sharp as ever. And loyal? David said there were only 3 men he'd trust with his life. Marcus was one of them. We met him at his home office the next afternoon. Small brick house, 3 blocks from the courthouse. Marcus greeted us at the door in sweatpants and a collared shirt, holding 2 mugs of black coffee. "All right," he said, motioning us inside. "Tell me everything." We laid it all out on his kitchen table. The notarized loan agreement, the fraudulent business mail, the bank call recording. Even the sticky notes Megan left on the fridge like I was their maid. He listened. He took notes. He didn't interrupt. And then he sat back, folded his arms, and looked at David. "You ready to do this?" he asked. David nodded. "We're done being doormats." Marcus smiled. "Good. Because you're in a stronger position than you think." The next 2 hours felt like both a strategy session and a therapy appointment. He explained our options. Quiet legal channels, no public exposure unless absolutely necessary. We could issue an official repayment demand for the $30,000. Legally enforceable, especially with the signed documents. Then came the housing issue. They're tenants, Marcus said, even if they're family. They have no lease, no formal rental agreement, and haven't contributed financially in over 3 months. That gives you grounds for a 30-day eviction under state law. David raised an eyebrow. Even though it's our son, Marcus didn't flinch. Blood doesn't void property rights. If anything, their misuse of your generosity strengthens your claim. By the time we left, Marcus had drafted 2 documents, a formal demand letter requiring repayment of the loan in full or legal action, a 30-day notice to vacate the upstairs wing of our home. He offered to deliver the letters personally. David declined. "No," he said, tucking the envelope into his coat. "This is something I need to hand him myself." As we drove home, I looked over at David, his jaw clenched, eyes steady on the road. And for the first time since Jason moved back in, I didn't see a father trying to protect his son. I saw a man protecting his wife, his home, and his future, and I felt proud to be sitting beside him. We didn't wait. The next morning, while Jason and Megan were still upstairs, probably sleeping in like they usually did, David and I drove straight to the bank. We opened a brand new joint account. Clean slate. We rerouted our Social Security deposits, our pensions, and the automatic transfers Jason had been managing on our behalf. That ended right then and there. He'd had access to too much for too long. Then we made another list. Cancel the auto pay for the utilities Jason had taken over under his name. Pull our names off the grocery delivery account. Unlink our cards from anything they might be using accidentally. By noon, the financial umbilical cord was cut. We stopped at the hardware store next, bought a new keypad lock system for the guest wing, the upstairs bedrooms, and their private entrance. David installed it himself before dinner. Not a word to them. Not yet. Just quiet actions. Click, click, lock, reset. By morning, the guest wing was secure. We could still hear them walking around upstairs. Still smell Megan's perfume in the hallway. But that part of the house was no longer accessible without our say-so. That morning, Jason pounded on the connecting door. "Did you change the lock?" David didn't answer right away. He walked into the kitchen, took his time pouring coffee. Then, calm as a Sunday afternoon, he handed Jason the envelope Marcus had given him. "Read this. You've got 30 days. Jason stared at him like he was speaking another language. "You're kicking us out? Are you serious?" David didn't blink. "We're reclaiming our home," Jason scoffed. That familiar, ugly laugh that meant he was scrambling for control. He looked at me like I'd break ranks, like I'd come to his defense, like always. But I didn't move. I didn't even stand up. He sat there for a long time, the envelope in front of him, flipping through the pages like he expected the words to change. But they didn't. Inside was everything Marcus had prepared. A photocopy of the notarized loan agreement bank printouts showing Jason's fraudulent credit line at our address. A transcript of his call to the bank claiming I was mentally unfit and a financial burden. And, of course, the 30-day notice to vacate. Signed, dated, and fully enforceable. Jason read in silence, his mouth twitching at the corners like he couldn't decide whether to cry or scream. I could see the gears turning behind his eyes, trying to calculate his next move, but the math wasn't on his side anymore. He looked up. This isn't how family handles things. I stayed where I was, leaning against the kitchen counter, arms folded. No. But lying, stealing, and using your parents, a dress for fraud, isn't how family handles things either. Megan finally appeared in the doorway, sleepy and confused. She looked from Jason to me, then down at the table. "What's going on?" Jason shoved the envelope toward her. "They're evicting us. They've lost their damn minds." Megan blinked at the documents, then turned to me. "Dot, is this some kind of mistake?" I held her gaze. "No, Megan. It's a boundary." She turned pale. Jason's jaw tightened. "We're not leaving," he said flatly. "You want to drag this into court? Fine. You want to ruin the family? Be my guest." David stepped back into the room then, calm, collected, like a man who had already considered every move on the board. "We don't want to ruin anything. We just want our home, our peace, and what's owed." Jason stood, suddenly energized. "You think a piece of paper means anything? You think a judge is going to side with you over your own son?" David looked at him with something between sadness and resolve. "No, I think a judge is going to side with the law. And right now, son, the law is on our side." Jason didn't respond. Not really. He just stood there, stunned, holding a truth he could no longer deny. And in that moment, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. But also, for the first time in a long time, I felt free. After the confrontation, things got quiet. Not peaceful, just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes before a storm. Jason and Megan barely came out of the guest wing. Meals were tense, conversations clipped or non-existent. The boys, Ethan and Ava, moved around the house like they didn't know where they were allowed to be anymore. And then one morning, I found it. A small, folded piece of paper on my pillow. I knew the handwriting instantly. Ava. Her loopy letters, her careful spacing. She always took her time, even when she was nervous. My throat tightened before I even opened it. We're sorry, Grandma. We know you're not a burden. We love you. Ava and Ethan. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding that note like it was a lifeline. I didn't cry. Not then. I just closed my eyes and breathed. They saw it. They saw how we were being treated, heard the comments, noticed the way Jason rolled his eyes, or how Megan corrected my every move. And even if they didn't understand all the legal steps or the money at stake, they understood enough. Children always do. David came in a few minutes later and saw me with the note. He didn't say a word, just sat beside me, took my hand. "This isn't just about money," I said. He nodded. It never was. I thought back to all the times I'd bitten my tongue, let things slide, smiled through the passive-aggressive digs, the corrections, the indifference. I did it because I thought it was better for the kids. I thought enduring it quietly was protecting them. But that note told me the truth. Silence teaches them too. And I wasn't going to teach them to accept disrespect, not even from their parents. Later that day, I left the note in a small frame on the bookshelf in the den, not to make a statement, not to stir trouble, just as a reminder, to myself mostly, of why we were doing this, not for revenge, not even for justice, for dignity, for example, for those two little hearts upstairs who were watching all of it unfold and learning what it means to have a spine, even when it hurts. And for every older woman who's ever been told she's too emotional, too dependent, or too much, I wanted to prove something. We still get to choose how our story ends, and ours was just getting started. It didn't take long. 3 days after David handed Jason the envelope, there was a knock at the door. 2 officers, one younger, one older, polite but serious. "Ma'am," the older one said, glancing down at a clipboard. "We received a call about a possible illegal eviction." David stepped beside me. "That would be our son." The younger officer raised an eyebrow. "Your son reported he's been locked out of part of his residence, despite having lived here for several months. Claims he was given no notice." I took a deep breath. "We can show you everything." We invited them in, sat them down at the kitchen table, the same place Jason had called me a burden, the same table where we'd once fed him birthday cake and taught him how to count money for chores. I laid it all out, the notarized loan agreement, the 30-day notice to vacate, signed and dated by our attorney, the evidence of financial misconduct tied to our address, and a copy of the property deed, our names, our home. The older officer skimmed the paperwork carefully, lips pursed. The younger one watched our faces. I could feel him observing, taking it all in, the calm, the quiet conviction, the lack of panic. "This is all in order," the senior officer finally said. "You're within your rights. The 30-day notice is legal, and since the space in question is a separate wing with its own entrance and no rental agreement, this qualifies as a guest arrangement, not tenancy." He looked at me then, and something in his tone softened. "Are you safe here, ma'am?" It took me a second to answer. Not because I was afraid, I wasn't, but because I hadn't realized how much I'd stopped feeling safe in my own house. I nodded. "I am now." He gave a small nod back. They left without incident, but I saw the patrol car pause outside just a little longer than necessary, like a warning or maybe a silent reassurance. Jason never spoke to us that day, but I saw the fear in his face when the officers left. He wasn't used to being told no. He certainly wasn't used to consequences. But now, the story he'd been telling, that he was the devoted son caring for his fragile, unstable mother, had collapsed. The law had confirmed what we already knew. We weren't just parents, we were people, and we had every right to protect ourselves. Jason couldn't hide behind guilt anymore. Now he'd have to face something far more intimidating than our disappointment. accountability. By the end of the week, the cracks started to show, not in our story, in theirs. Jason and Megan had spent the last year painting us as needy, helpless, aging parents who just didn't understand modern life. They told everyone, Megan's family, their friends, even the school moms, that they were doing us a favor by living here. We couldn't just leave them alone, Megan had told her sister last Christmas. They need us. But now, people were seeing the truth. It started with Megan's mother, of all people. She showed up at our door 2 days after the police visit, awkward, hands twisting her handbag strap. I didn't know, she said softly. Megan said it was different, that you were sick. I invited her in. We sat at the table. I didn't cry. I didn't accuse. I just showed her the paperwork, the signed loan agreement, the eviction notice, the transcript from the bank call where Jason had described me as mentally unstable. She covered her mouth and shook her head. I'm so sorry. She left quietly, but I knew that look. She believed me, and that meant the story was already spreading. By Sunday, David heard from one of Jason's old friends, a man who hadn't called in over a year. He said he felt sick hearing what Jason did. David told me. Said he'd loaned them money too, never got it back. The story unraveled faster than I expected. Jason's little narrative, the hardworking couple supporting elderly parents, fell apart under one undeniable fact. We had the proof, and we weren't hiding anymore. I overheard Megan yelling upstairs that night, her voice echoing through the closed door. You said they wouldn't do anything. You said they didn't have it in them. Jason didn't yell back. He never did when he felt cornered. He just went quiet, the kind of quiet he used to reserve for courtroom shows and losing lottery tickets. By the following Thursday, they were packing. Suitcases, boxes, Megan on speakerphone with her mother trying to figure out where they could go. They didn't say goodbye. They didn't apologize. They just left. And when the door shut behind them for the last time, I didn't cheer. I didn't pour wine or dance in the living room like people always imagine. I just stood there with David and exhaled. It wasn't revenge. It was relief. And the air in that house had never felt cleaner. 1 week after they moved out, my phone rang. I was in the garden, pulling weeds, dirt under my fingernails, peace finally starting to settle into my bones. David was on the porch, reading the paper. The sky was soft, overcast, the kind of gray that makes everything feel calm. And then I heard it, the ringtone I hadn't changed in years. Jason. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then let it ring. A few minutes later, another call, then a text. Mom, please. Then another call. I finally picked up, not because I was ready, but because I needed to hear what rock bottom sounded like. Mom? His voice cracked. Just one word, and already I could tell. This wasn't anger. This wasn't arrogance. It was fear. Mom, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I don't know what to do. I stayed quiet. Let the silence settle in. I lost the client I was counting on. Megan's staying at her mom's. I need help. Just for a little while. I'm not asking to move back in or anything, just, I don't know where to go. The guilt dripped from every word. Maybe some of it was real. Maybe most of it wasn't. I wasn't there to measure it anymore. I looked over at David. He was watching me, calm, not pushing, not warning, just waiting to see what I'd decide. And that's the part Jason never understood. For decades, he had treated me like I had no agency, no lines I could draw, no limits he had to respect. But I did, and I drew one now. Jason, I said, steady as ever, do you remember that dinner? He was silent. The one where you called me a burden? A soft breath. Mom, I didn't mean. I know exactly what you meant. I let the pause stretch long enough for it to land. You lost more than a roof that night. You lost my help. You lost the right to ask. He didn't answer. So I finished it. I love you, Jason, but I'm not here to save you anymore. And then I hung up. Not in anger, not in triumph, just in certainty. Because this time, I wasn't walking away from him. I was walking back to me. After I hung up, I stood there for a moment with the phone still in my hand. No shaking, no tears, no second guessing, just quiet. I looked up at the sky. The clouds had thinned, letting streaks of sunlight break through. I could hear David's footsteps on the porch behind me. "Was that him?" he asked. I nodded. He wanted help. David didn't ask what I said. He didn't need to. Because for the first time since our son moved back in, I hadn't softened. I hadn't rushed to fix things. I hadn't folded myself up into the shape that made other people comfortable. I'd stayed firm, calm, clear. Jason thought I'd always be there to bail him out. He thought being my son gave him a lifetime pass to cross any line, say anything, take anything, and still come back for more. And for a long time, I believed it too. That being a mother meant never saying no. That love meant sacrifice without end. But I was done sacrificing pieces of myself just to keep the peace. "You did the right thing," David said, brushing dirt from my shoulder. "I know," I said, and I did, deep in my bones. I walked inside, made a cup of tea, and sat down at the same kitchen table where this all started. This wasn't about revenge. It never had been. It was about dignity. Because when Jason called me a burden in front of his children, he wasn't just talking to me. He was teaching them how to treat women, how to treat aging parents, how to value love when it's no longer convenient. And I wasn't going to let that be the last lesson they got from me. I didn't slam doors. I didn't scream. I didn't threaten or punish. I did something harder. I set a boundary, and I kept it. And that, more than anything, was the win, not the eviction notice. Not the repayment letters, not even the legal victories. This was the real victory. I didn't abandon who I was to earn love that should have already been there. I chose self-respect over silence. I chose peace over guilt. And I chose myself, maybe for the first time in 40 years. Jason may never understand what he lost, but I finally understood what I'd gained.